Hi everyone, so this is my second video in the shelf isolation series. So the second book I'm going to talk about today is this, and you can't really see the sun shining on it. It's George Eliot, The Mill on the Floss. So George Eliot, just to give you a bit of background knowledge, she's a Victorian writer from Nuneaton, so I thought it was very fitting to talk about it. And this is a writer that I'm actually thinking of doing for my university dissertation. And there's going to be a range of books I'm going to talk about. This is probably my favourite. Hadn't actually encountered her, like I knew about her, but hadn't actually read any of her work until I was at uni. And this was the first book I read of hers while I was at uni. So basically, the book was first published in 1860, so very much in the Victorian period. And it's a Bildungsroman, so it's all about growing up, a lesson of self-discovery. And what it is, the reason why I like it is it largely plays into the role of women in that time period. I was thinking, you'll go on to do this more if you study literature at uni, but all about the position of women in literature. So in the Victorian era, there was a lot of, they called it, well, questions basically. So you've got the woman question. So what did it mean to be a woman? And gender inequality basically. So the reason why I like it is it brings all these issues into play. So you've got the role of women, education, sexual desire, and George Eliot is also known for being, she uses realism a lot. So you'll read her books and there's no sense of it being idealist, like it's all about common people basically. So more about this book specifically. So you've got characters, the protagonist is Maggie Tulliver, and when the book starts she's 9 years old, and we're introduced to this setting where it's her and her brother Tom. Tom's a bit older than her, not by that much, but a few years. And basically, they have quite a good relationship. But we're kind of introduced to the fact of Mr. Tulliver, their father, wanting to send Tom to school, and they've saved up this money for him to be able to go to school. And Maggie is very clever, and she also wants to go, which is kind of a thing that unheard of, all to do with gender roles, like the women staying at home, more the men being the breadwinner. So women's role was to care for the children, be the housewife. And Maggie is too young to understand society around her basically, so she's really naive, and kind of this sense of she doesn't really know where she belongs in the world. So basically, the mill on the Floss, so they live in Dorset Mill, and the Floss is the river basically, so they live on the mill next to the River Floss. And I don't want to spoil it too much while narrating the whole plot, but they go through some struggles, and the father basically becomes bankrupt, and it turns out that they're gonna lose the mill basically. And in like around about the middle of the book, their father dies, and it kind of, there comes a divide between Tom and Maggie because they were really close. Maggie kind of, Tom sees her as quite an annoying little sister, kind of like the tag along, but they do get along most of the time. And basically, when Tom goes to school, one of his companions there is a guy called Philip Wakem, and we learn that Philip is disabled, and he's a hunchback basically. And obviously now in the 21st century, we kind of view disability, it's not something to be ashamed of, but at that time they were marginalised, viewed as an outcast. And basically Maggie, because she's so young, she doesn't see this as an issue, but Tom is kind of a bit more reserved to being friendly towards Philip. Philip's dad and Tom and Maggie's dad are rivals, so this doesn't help the situation. So Maggie and Philip form this friendship, despite the fact that she's not really allowed to, and they go off in secret together. And Maggie forms this friendship with him, and it's kind of like she doesn't know if she loves him or not. She's still really young. Does she know what love is yet? And then basically, as the book goes on, we're introduced to her cousin Lucy, and Lucy and Maggie are set up as opposites. So Lucy's kind of like this blonde-haired, blue-eyed figure, where Maggie's like a brunette, brown eyes, tomboy figure. That's how she's portrayed to be. Loves adventure, and I think one reason I like it is I cannot. I think everyone who reads it can identify with Maggie, like as they were like as a child. She's very unaware of the world around her, basically. So there's a time where she'll run away with the gypsies, for example, because she doesn't understand that they're gypsies, and she cuts off all her hair in a state of anger, thinking that's a very like self-assertive thing to do, and then she just gets laughed at. And it's all about learning, basically, and growth. And we're introduced to Lucy, who's very prim and proper, doesn't like getting dirty. And there's an instant where Maggie and her, well, they fall in the mud, basically, Lucy does. And Maggie sees it as really funny, and it's all adventure, and Lucy is just not like that at all. And as they grow older, Lucy's suitor, Stephen, meets Maggie, and they basically fall in love, but he's meant to be getting married to Lucy. And what happens is Maggie's then torn between Philip and Stephen, and Stephen kind of not coerces her, but kind of, and she just goes along with it. And it basically turns out then that she gets exiled, basically. And towards the end, the Floss, the river, basically floods, and she goes to meet, like she goes to try and rescue Tom despite what has happened, because he's just fully against her now. And basically she manages to get Tom in this boat, but the current's too strong, and spoiler alert, they die. And the line is, in their death they were not divided. And that's a really important part of the book, because with it being a Bildungsroman, it's not just Maggie's Bildungsroman, it's Tom's as well. And it's kind of it's autobiographical. You need to know a bit of background knowledge about George Eliot, but she basically had like, her brother had some hostility towards her, basically, because she had an affair, and people kind of think that through this she's trying to recreate that relationship that she had with her brother, and showing how they were so close and they're eternally like bonded, basically. So actually, on the back of this version, it's got a quotation from the book, and it says, "It's bad," Mr. Tulliver added. "A woman's no business with being so clever. It'll turn to trouble, I doubt." So that's kind of what draws me to this book, because I'm very interested in the whole position of women, gender roles, as I was saying at the start. And it's kind of like a woman being clever is not seen as a good thing. So it brings very important issues like that to the surface, but also this book will have you laughing in parts, it'll be sad in parts. Like, to Maggie as a very young child, it's the bits where we laugh, and then as it goes on, we kind of see this struggle to be accepted, struggle to understand love, struggle to learn, basically, and struggling to find her place in society. And we kind of get the pressures around her. So you've got pressures from what her mother's like, pressures from her father, because she just wants to be accepted, basically. She just wants to be loved. Pressures from Tom, because it's always about Maggie pleasing Tom. Pressures to be like Lucy, basically. I have gone into the plot, but there's so many more different characters around Maggie that influence her. And kind of by the end, that's what makes the ending more sad, because we're almost rooting for Maggie, because we've seen her as so naive, and we just want her to grow and actually like finally find happiness. And you could argue that she does get him back to her brother, but it's stunted, I feel like. So it's a really good book. classic Victorian woman, like the classic Victorian tropes basically of a woman struggling, given into sexual desire, which is just expressing your sexuality as a woman, was it's not a good thing to do. Basically, they didn't view it like that anyway. Victorians, they weren't allowed to basically as women having no voice. So if you're interested in gender roles really, and how women are expected to be, how they're expected to perform, then I think this is a really good book that explores that. It's quite lengthy, but it's an enjoyable read, and it really captures the essence of what it is to be a woman. What does it mean? How should a woman be? And it kind of highlights kind of the flaws in society and how they treat women. And I guess she was kind of advocating for that change because that's something that she's gone through herself. Just to give you a bit of, if you've never heard of George Eliot, that's not actually her name, that's her pen name. So she used a male pseudonym basically, because women, again, drawing attention to it, they weren't allowed to write. You had to be a man to get a novel published. So kind of just drawing on all those autobiographical issues, and I feel like we'll never know, we can't ask her, but I feel like George Eliot probably identified with Maggie. And as I've said, I think if you just decide to read it, you'll see bits of Maggie in yourself. Even if you're a boy, the fact that how she is when she's a child, how she's so childish and doesn't understand the world. So yeah, that's a book I'd recommend. I'll probably talk about some more of her books because they are really good, and it's more to do with like the mind and psychoanalysis basically, and understanding people. So yeah, so if you decide to read it, I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening.